No phones, no signal, no cameras. An entire hotel completely offline. And yet, someone was murdered, and no one remembers it.
The city never really went silent, not even here, not even behind the polished glass facade of a place that sold silence as a luxury. But the hotel tried harder than most, and that was already suspicious. It stood between two louder buildings like a held breath, tall, minimalistic, deliberately anonymous, its name written in thin, almost disappearing letters above the entrance, The Veil. Nothing flashy, nothing that would attract a crowd, which was precisely why the people who knew about it trusted it, because the ones who paid to disappear never wanted to be seen arriving. Edward Hale paused across the street for exactly 3 seconds longer than necessary, not because he admired architecture, but because he disliked walking into places that promised something absolute: silence, truth, purity. Those promises always came with conditions written in invisible ink, and he had learned the hard way that invisible ink was the only kind that mattered. The rain had already stopped, leaving the pavement dark and reflective, turning the building into a vertical smear of muted light. And in that reflection, he caught himself doing what he always did: scanning, measuring, reconstructing patterns that did not yet exist, as if the case had already started before he had even stepped inside, which, in his experience, it usually had. The call had been brief, almost annoyingly so, which meant it had come from someone who either knew exactly what they were dealing with or had no idea at all, and in both cases, they ended up dialing him. No police dispatch, no formal request, just a name, a location, and a sentence that didn't sit right. "We have a problem that cannot be recorded," followed by a pause that was too deliberate to be accidental, and we'd prefer to keep it that way. And that was enough, because people who wanted things unrecorded rarely wanted them solved, they wanted them contained. Hale stepped off the curb, crossed the street, and noticed the absence of small details that most people would never register. No security cameras above the entrance, no reflective domes in the corners, no visible sensors, nothing that would suggest observation, which was already observation of a different kind, the deliberate absence of surveillance as a feature, not a flaw. The doors opened before he reached them, silently, as if the building had decided he was expected, and the first thing that hit him was not the air itself, but the way it felt: thicker, warmer, engineered to be pleasant without being noticeable, the kind of atmosphere designed by someone who understood that the most effective manipulations were the ones people described as comfort. The lobby was understated to the point of aggression: neutral tones, soft lighting, no sharp edges, everything designed to avoid creating anchors for memory, because the brain remembered contrast, and here there was none. Behind a reception desk stood a woman who did not look surprised to see him, which meant she had been told exactly when he would arrive, even if no one had told him. She smiled in a way that suggested politeness rather than warmth, and that distinction mattered. Hale approached, already cataloging the layout, the distances, the exits, the lack of visible staff, the subtle hum behind the walls that might have been ventilation or something more precise. "Mr. Hale," she said before he introduced himself. "That depends," he replied, placing his hands lightly on the counter, not leaning, not committing his weight, "on what version of me you were expecting." "The one who doesn't believe in the impossible." "Good, then we're already aligned." She slid a small matte tray toward him, the kind used in high-end restaurants to present something more important than it actually was, and on it lay a thin envelope and a single key card, no branding, no markings. "We'll need your phone," she said. He looked at the tray, then at her. "You'll need a better reason," he answered. "It's part of the experience," she said, and there it was, the word that always did the heavy lifting. Experience. Something intangible, unmeasurable, conveniently unprovable. "I'm not here for the experience." "No one ever is," she said, still smiling, "until they are." He took out his phone anyway, not because he agreed, but because refusing would tell him less than complying, and placed it on the tray, watching her eyes rather than the object, because people revealed more in how they observed a surrender than in the surrender itself. She didn't check it, didn't verify anything, just covered it with the envelope as if sealing a deal that had already been accepted. "You'll get it back when you leave." "If I leave." Her smile tightened by half a degree, the smallest acknowledgement that the conversation had shifted. "Everyone leaves," she said. "That's not what I asked." She did not answer, which was an answer. Instead, she gestured towards a corridor that seemed longer than it should have been given the building's exterior dimensions, another small inconsistency filed away for later. Hale picked up the key card, feeling its weight, too light to contain anything interesting, which meant the interesting parts were elsewhere, and turned away from the desk without looking back, because people tended to watch departures more closely than arrivals, and he preferred to not give them anything to study. The corridor swallowed sound, not just dampening it, but erasing it, as if each step was being negotiated with the floor before it allowed to exist. And halfway down, he became aware of the scent, not strong, not identifiable, but present, a curated neutrality that aimed to be interpreted as calm. He slowed slightly, enough to notice how the air moved, or rather, how it didn't. The circulation too even, too controlled, suggesting a system that was less about comfort and more about precision. At the end of the corridor, a man stood waiting, not in uniform, not quite staff, not quite guest, the kind of person who existed in spaces like this to make sure nothing broke the illusion. "Mr. Hale," she said before he introduced himself. "That depends," he replied, placing his hands lightly on the counter, not leaning, not committing his weight, "on what version of me you were expecting." "The one who doesn't believe in the impossible." "Good, then we're already aligned." She slid a small matte tray toward him, the kind used in high-end restaurants to present something more important than it actually was, and on it lay a thin envelope and a single key card, no branding, no markings. "We'll need your phone," she said. He looked at the tray, then at her. "You'll need a better reason," he answered. "It's part of the experience," she said, and there it was, the word that always did the heavy lifting. Experience, something intangible, unmeasurable, conveniently unprovable. "I'm not here for the experience." "No one ever is," she said, still smiling, "until they are." He took out his phone anyway, not because he agreed, but because refusing would tell him less than complying, and placed it on the tray, watching her eyes rather than the object, because people revealed more in how they observed a surrender than in the surrender itself. She didn't check it, didn't verify anything, just covered it with the envelope as if sealing a deal that had already been accepted. "You'll get it back when you leave." "If I leave." Her smile tightened by half a degree, the smallest acknowledgement that the conversation had shifted. "Everyone leaves," she said. "That's not what I asked." She did not answer, which was an answer. Instead, she gestured towards a corridor that seemed longer than it should have been given the building's exterior dimensions, another small inconsistency filed away for later. Hale picked up the key card, feeling its weight, too light to contain anything interesting, which meant the interesting parts were elsewhere, and turned away from the desk without looking back, because people tended to watch departures more closely than arrivals, and he preferred to not give them anything to study. The corridor swallowed sound, not just dampening it, but erasing it, as if each step was being negotiated with the floor before it allowed to exist, and halfway down he became aware of the scent, not strong, not identifiable, but present, a curated neutrality that aimed to be interpreted as calm. He slowed slightly, enough to notice how the air moved, or rather, how it didn't, the circulation too even, too controlled, suggesting a system that was less about comfort and more about precision. At the end of the corridor, a man stood waiting, not in uniform, not quite staff, not quite guest, the kind of person who existed in spaces like this to make sure nothing broke the illusion.
"Mr. Hale," the man said, extending a hand that Hale did not immediately take. "You're either very good at timing," Hale replied, "or very bad at pretending this isn't staged." "We prefer efficient," the man said, withdrawing his hand without offense, which meant he had practiced this interaction. "Efficient would have been telling me what happened before I walked in." "Efficient," the man said, "is making sure you see it without interference." Hale considered that, did not at once, a minimal concession. "Lead the way." They moved through another set of corridors, each one subtly different in proportion but identical in intent, until they reached a door that did not match the others, not in design but in the way the air around it felt, stiller, heavier, as if the building itself had paused there. The man stopped, turned, and for the first time his expression lost the rehearsed neutrality. Before we go in, he said, there's something you should know. That you don't have cameras? No recordings, no logs, no digital footprint? The man blinked once, surprised despite himself. You've been here before. No, Hale said, but I've seen the business model. And yet you came. You said someone died, Hale replied. That usually narrows my options. The man hesitated, then nodded, accepting that whatever script he had prepared was no longer useful. He was found an hour ago, he said. Guest, checked in yesterday. No known issues, no conflicts, no anomalies. In the room? Hale asked. Locked from the inside. Of course it was. And the other guests? They were on the same floor, the man said, but none of them remember anything relevant. Hale tilted his head slightly. Define relevant. They remember dinner, the man said. They remember conversations. They remember going to their rooms and then nothing, not until morning. And you're telling me this, Hale said slowly, in a place that advertises disconnection, calm, and controlled environments. Yes. And you don't see the problem. We see a dead body, the man said, a flicker of irritation finally breaking through. That's the problem. Hale looked at the door, then back at the man. No, Hale said quietly, that's the result. He reached for the handle, then paused just long enough to register the scent again, slightly stronger here, still undefined, still intentional, and then he opened the door. The room was exactly what he expected and nothing like it at the same time. Minimal, balanced, curated to the point of sterility, every object placed to avoid drawing attention, which made the one thing that did stand out impossible to ignore. The body lay on the floor between the bed and the window, positioned in a way that suggested collapse rather than struggle, one arm bent awkwardly beneath him, the other extended as if reaching for something that had never been there. There was no blood, no visible trauma, no immediate cause of death, just the unsettling absence of explanation, and Hale felt the familiar shift in his mind, the moment when a scene stopped being a collection of objects and became a system waiting to be decoded. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him, sealing the room into a contained equation, and for a second, just one, he allowed himself to consider the possibility that the hotel had been telling the truth, that there really were no cameras, no records, no digital traces, nothing but what was here, now, in front of him. And instead of frustration, he felt something close to clarity, because stripped of noise, stripped of endless digital traces, the case reduced itself to its simplest form: space, time, and human behavior, and those, unlike data, rarely lied. He crouched beside the body, not touching, just observing, letting the details settle into place, the angle of the fall, the position of the feet, the barely perceptible trace of ash on the carpet that did not belong in a room where no one smoked, and somewhere in the background, underneath the engineered silence, he could almost hear the structure of the problem assembling itself piece by piece into something that would either make perfect sense or collapse entirely. He exhaled slowly, the scent in the air catching at the back of his throat. Not unpleasant, not strong, just enough to be noticed if you were looking for it, which most people wouldn't be, which is precisely why it mattered. And as he straightened, his gaze moving from the body to the door, to the walls, to the invisible systems that shaped everything without being seen, one thought settled in with uncomfortable certainty. Not that the killer had found a way to act without being observed, but that the entire environment had been designed to make observation unreliable, and that was a very different kind of problem. He turned slightly, addressing the man still standing near the entrance.
You said no one remembers anything, Hale said. Yes. He looked back at the body. That's not entirely true. The man frowned. What do you mean? Hale's eyes moved to the faint smear near the victim's hand, then to the carpet, then to the air itself. It means, he said, someone remembers exactly what happened. A pause. Then why haven't they said anything? Hale allowed himself a thin, humorless smile. Because, he said, they don't know that they do. The first mistake people made when they walked into the veil was assuming that nothing was happening, that silence meant absence, that the lack of screens, notifications, blinking indicators, and digital noise translated into a kind of purity that reality had never actually possessed. Edward Hale stood in the center of the room for longer than necessary, not because he was unsure, but because stillness revealed more than movement, and in a space designed to erase contrast, the smallest deviation became a signal. The body remained where it had fallen, untouched, undisturbed, already beginning to look less like a person and more like a problem, which was how all investigations started if you stripped away the theatrics, geometry, not tragedy. He let his eyes adjust, not to the light, but to the distribution of attention, mapping where a normal person would look first, second, third, and then deliberately avoiding those points, because whoever had done this would have relied on predictable observation patterns, and Hale had no intention of being predictable. The carpet, a neutral shade deliberately chosen to hide minor imperfections, betrayed the first inconsistency, a faint compression pattern leading not directly to the body, but offset by a few degrees, as if someone had approached, paused, adjusted their position, and then continued, a hesitation that suggested intent rather than panic. He crouched again, lowering himself into the scene, bringing his perspective down to the level where details stopped being abstract and started being physical, measurable, undeniable. And there it was again. The ash, a thin, almost dismissible trace near the victim's right hand, gray against gray, easy to miss unless you were already looking for something that didn't belong. He didn't touch it, not yet, because touching changed things, and changed things lied. Instead, he traced its perimeter with his gaze, noting the dispersion, the directionality, the absence of burn marks on the carpet, which meant it hadn't fallen from above in a normal sense, but had been transferred, carried, placed indirectly. He stood, shifting his attention to the bed, perfectly made, untouched, which was wrong because people who collapsed rarely did so without disrupting their immediate environment, and yet here the bed remained a pristine suggestion of rest that had never occurred. He moved to the window, not because it offered an exit, it didn't, but because people tended to orient themselves toward openings, even when those openings were sealed, and the angle of the body suggested a movement in that direction, a final, incomplete decision. Outside, the city continued its indifferent rhythm, unaware, or more precisely, uninterested, and the glass reflected the room back at him with just enough distortion to remind him that reflections were always a negotiation between reality and perception. He turned back, letting the room reassemble in his mind, each element placed in relation to the others, constructing a timeline that did not yet exist but would, inevitably, force itself into coherence. Behind him, the man shifted his weight, a subtle sound that in any other place would have been insignificant, but here, in engineered quiet, it carried enough information to be noticed. "You're seeing something," the man said. "I'm always seeing something," Hale replied without looking at him. "The question is whether it's relevant." "And is it?" Hale walked toward the door, then stopped just short of it, turning his attention to the handle, not touching it, just observing the way light interacted with its surface, the absence of smudges where there should have been some, the slight difference in sheen that suggested it had been cleaned more recently than the rest of the room, not thoroughly, not obsessively, but selectively, which meant someone knew where attention would fall and had acted accordingly. "Tell me about the staff," Hale said. "What about them? Who has access to this floor?" "Only assigned personnel. Rotations are limited. Background checks are extensive."
"That's not what I asked," Hale said, finally turning. "Who has access?" The man hesitated, recalibrating. "Management," he said. "Supervisors. Maintenance, if required. And tonight. Standard coverage." Hale nodded once, as if that answer had confirmed something he already suspected rather than provided new information, then moved past the man into the corridor, pausing just outside the room, because thresholds mattered, because transitions between spaces often revealed what the spaces themselves concealed. The air here felt marginally different, not enough for a guest to notice, but enough for someone who was paying attention. A subtle shift in density, in scent concentration, in the way breathing registered in the back of the throat. And he filed that away next to the ash, next to the carpet, next to the absence of disturbance on the bed, assembling a pattern that was not yet complete but was beginning to suggest its own logic. The corridor stretched in both directions, identical in appearance, deliberately disorienting in its uniformity, and for a moment Hale closed his eyes, not in contemplation, but in calibration, removing visual input to isolate everything else, the faint hum of ventilation, the almost imperceptible movement of air, the distant, muffled presence of other people who did not know they were relevant yet. "You said the other guests don't remember anything," he said, opening his eyes. "Nothing useful," the man corrected. "That's not the same thing," Hale replied. "Where are they now?" "In their rooms." "Good," Hale said. "Let's keep them there." "They've already been informed." "No," Hale cut him off, his tone still calm, still controlled, but now carrying a precision that suggested the conversation was no longer optional. "They've been reassured. That's different. I don't want reassured people. I want uncertain ones." The man frowned. "Uncertainty leads to panic." "Uncertainty leads to honesty," Hale said. "Panic comes later." A brief silence settled between them, not uncomfortable, but charged with the recognition that control was shifting, not dramatically, not visibly, but inevitably. "What do you need?" the man asked. Hale considered the question, not because he didn't know the answer, but because answers given too quickly tended to be dismissed as instinct rather than method. "I need them in one place," he said. "All of them. Same room, same air." "That's not standard procedure." "Neither is a dead guest," Hale replied. The man exhaled, a controlled release that suggested compliance rather than agreement. "I'll arrange it," he said. "Good," Hale answered, already moving, already reconstructing the next phase of the investigation in his head, because scenes were static, but people were dynamic, and whatever happened in that room had not been confined to it. As they walked, Hale's attention drifted back, not physically, but conceptually, to the body, to the ash, to the faint scent that lingered just beyond conscious recognition, and he began to outline the first real hypothesis, not as a conclusion, but as a framework. If the environment affected perception, then perception itself had become a variable, and variables could be manipulated. The hotel did not eliminate observation, it altered it, redistributed it, filtered it through controlled conditions, and in doing so, it created a space where events could occur without being properly encoded into memory, which meant that the absence of recollection was not a gap but a result. They reached a wider area at the end of the corridor, a lounge designed for quiet interaction, soft chairs arranged in a way that encouraged conversation without enforcing it, and already staff were moving with discreet efficiency, guiding guests into the space with carefully chosen words that avoided triggering alarm while still ensuring compliance. Hale paused at the entrance, taking in the scene, not the people individually yet, but the system they formed together. Posture, distance, eye movement, the subtle ways in which individuals reacted to shared uncertainty. "They look calm," the man said quietly, as if calm were a success metric. "They look managed," Hale corrected. He stepped forward, entering the space without announcement, without introduction, because introductions created expectations, and expectations altered behavior, and right now, behavior needed to be as unfiltered as possible. Conversations dipped, not stopped, just enough to acknowledge a new variable in the room, and Hale let the silence stretch for a second longer than comfortable, because discomfort accelerated truth in ways politeness never could. He scanned faces, not for guilt, that was too blunt, too obvious, but for dissonance, for the small fractures between what people felt and what they believed they should feel, and almost immediately he found it, not in one person, but in the pattern itself, a shared hesitation that did not align with the narrative they had been given. He stopped near the center, turning slowly, ensuring that his presence was registered by everyone without needing to raise his voice. "I'm not here to accuse anyone," he said, his tone even, controlled, almost conversational. "And I'm not here to reassure you." A ripple moved through the room, subtle but real. "I'm here because something happened," he continued. "And right now, None of you remember it. A man near the back shifted, arms crossing defensively. We've already spoken to management, he said. They told us it was a medical... They told you what you needed to hear, Hale said, cutting through the sentence without raising his voice. I'm telling you what matters. A pause. What matters, Hale repeated, is that memory is unreliable, especially in environments like this. A woman near the window frowned. What do you mean, like this? Hale glanced at her, noting the way her gaze flickered briefly toward the ceiling fence before returning to him, a reflex that suggested unconscious awareness. I mean controlled, he said, curated, optimized. That's the point of the hotel, someone else added, a hint of irritation surfacing. We came here to disconnect. And you did, more than you realize. Silence settled again, heavier this time, less comfortable. I'm going to ask you all a question, not about what you remember, but about what feels wrong. The man who had spoken earlier scoffed. That's not very scientific. Hale allowed himself a faint smile. Neither is forgetting an entire evening, he replied. A few people exchanged glances, the first cracks in the collective composure beginning to show. Close your eyes, Hale said. No, the man replied immediately. Hale looked at him, not challenging, just observing. Then don't, he said, but the rest of you should. One by one, not at once, but gradually, people complied, some hesitantly, some almost eagerly, as if following an instruction relieved them of responsibility. Hale watched the ones who kept their eyes open as closely as the ones who closed them, because resistance was as informative as compliance. Now, Hale said, forget what you've been told, forget the explanations, forget the timeline. A breath. Think about the last moment you felt completely certain of where you were. Silence. Not approximately, Hale added, exactly. Another breath. Hold that moment, he said, and then tell me what comes immediately after it. The woman by the window spoke first, her voice uncertain. Dinner, she said. We were in the dining area. And after that? Hale asked. A pause. I went to my room. Did you? Hale said. She hesitated. I think so. Thinking isn't remembering, Hale said gently. What do you actually recall? Her brow furrowed. I remember standing up, she said slowly. And then... She stopped. And then? Hale prompted. I don't know. Hale nodded, not surprised, not disappointed. Good, he said. The man with his arms crossed shifted again. This proves nothing. It proves a gap, Hale replied. And gaps are where things happen. He turned slightly, addressing the room as a whole. You don't remember because you weren't meant to, he said. That's the design. A murmur spread, low, uncertain, the first signs of something less manageable than calm. What are you saying? Someone asked. Hale's gaze moved across the room, steady, deliberate. I'm saying, he answered, that whatever happened tonight didn't happen in spite of this place. A pause. It happened because of it. The room did not change, not in any visible way, but the way people occupied it shifted almost immediately, and that was always the first real sign that something had started to work. Edward Hale did not move from his position because movement implied urgency, and urgency made people defensive, and right now he needed them slightly off balance, not alarmed, not panicked, just misaligned enough with their own certainty that they would start correcting themselves out loud. The silence that followed his last sentence stretched, thinned, then fractured into small, uneven sounds, breathing, fabric shifting, someone clearing their throat as if to reclaim control of a conversation that no longer belonged to them. Hale let it happen, because forcing structure too early would collapse the natural patterns that were already forming. Instead, he shifted his focus from the group to individuals, not by staring, but by allowing his gaze to rest just long enough on each person to register the micro-adjustments, eye movements, posture changes, the subtle recalibration of personal space that occurred when people felt observed without knowing exactly why. The woman by the window opened her eyes first, not abruptly, but with the cautious hesitation of someone testing whether the world had changed in her absence. And when she looked at Hale again, there was something new there. Not fear, not yet, but the beginning of doubt. "You're suggesting," she said, her voice steadier than she probably felt, "that we were manipulated?" "I'm suggesting that your perception was managed." "That's the same thing." "No," he said. "Manipulation implies intent directed at you. Management implies a system that doesn't care who you are." A man seated near the center leaned forward, elbows on his knees, fingers interlaced in a way that suggested he was trying to anchor himself to something concrete. "This is a wellness hotel. They use scents, lighting, sound. Yes, it's controlled, that's the point. But you're making it sound like a variable," he finished for him, "because it is." The man frowned. "A variable in what?" Hale let the question hang for a second, not because he didn't have an answer, but because the room needed to feel the weight of not having one. "In behavior," he said finally. "In memory. In decision-making." A quiet shift rippled through the group again, less contained this time, less easily smoothed over by polite assumptions. "That's ridiculous," someone muttered. "Is it?" Hale asked, turning slightly toward the voice without fully identifying the speaker. "You just admitted you can't account for a portion of your own evening." "That doesn't mean—" "It means," Hale said, still calm, still precise, "that your confidence in your own recollection is already compromised." He took a step forward now, not toward anyone specific, but into the shared space between them, reducing the psychological distance just enough to force engagement.
"Let's simplify this," he continued. "You remember arriving, you remember dinner, you remember fragments of conversation, and then there's a gap." "That doesn't prove anything," the man insisted. "It proves a boundary," Hale corrected, "a before and an after with no continuity between them. And your theory is that someone used that gap to, what, kill someone in the next room and walk away unnoticed?" "My theory," Hale said, "is that the gap is the method." Silence again, but different now, more focused, less diffuse, as if the room itself had leaned in. "That doesn't make sense," the woman said. "It doesn't need to make sense yet," Hale replied. "It needs to be consistent." He turned slightly, scanning the group again, this time looking for alignment, for the way certain individuals gravitated towards shared interpretations while others resisted them. And almost immediately, he identified the fracture lines, two clusters forming organically, one leaning toward dismissal, the other toward reluctant acceptance, and between them, a few individuals who had not yet decided which version of reality was more comfortable. "You," he said, nodding toward a man near the edge of the group. "You said you went to your room after dinner." The man straightened slightly, caught off guard by the direct attention. "Yes." "Walk me through it." "There's nothing to walk through," the man said. "I left the dining area, took the corridor, and went to my room." "And what do you remember between leaving the dining area and entering your room?" The man opened his mouth, then paused. "I walked," he said. Hale tilted his head. "That's not a memory," he said. "That's an assumption." A few people shifted uncomfortably. "I remember the corridor," the man added quickly. "What about it?" "It was quiet." "They're all quiet," Hale said. "What made that one different?" The man hesitated again, his gaze drifting upward for a fraction of a second, as if searching for something that had been there before. "I don't know," he admitted. "Good," Hale said. "That's not good," the man snapped. "That means I don't remember." "It means," Hale corrected, "that you're starting to separate what you think happened from what you actually experienced."
He shifted his attention to another guest, a younger woman sitting slightly apart from the others, her posture closed, arms drawn in, as if she had already begun withdrawing from the group dynamic. "You," he said gently, "what's the first thing that feels wrong?" She looked up, startled, then hesitated, as if unsure whether speaking would commit her to something she couldn't take back. "I don't like the smell," she said finally. The room stilled. "What smell?" someone asked. "I don't know," she said, shaking her head slightly. "It's not strong, it's just there." Hale watched the reactions, the way some people instinctively inhaled, testing the air, while others dismissed it before even trying. "It's part of the experience," the man from earlier said quickly. "They use essential oils, diffusers." "Yes," Hale said smoothly, "I do too." He took a slow breath himself, deliberately, not exaggerating, just enough to register the composition of the air, the layered neutrality that masked its components. "And what if," he continued, "the experience has side effects?" "That's speculation," the man insisted. "Everything is, until it isn't."
He turned away from the group for a moment, just long enough to break the direct line of engagement, then walked toward the far side of the room, where the air felt marginally different again, not stronger, not weaker, just altered in distribution, as if the system that maintained it was more active there. He paused beneath a vent, looking up briefly, not because he expected to see anything, but because looking changed how people thought about what he might be seeing. "You all trusted this place," he said without turning back. "You trusted the absence of technology, the absence of recording, the absence of interruption." He lowered his gaze. "But absence is not neutrality," he continued. "It's a condition." A pause. "And conditions can be engineered." He turned back to them now, his expression unchanged, his tone still even, but the direction of the conversation had shifted irreversibly. "Let's try something else," he said. "Instead of asking what you remember, let's ask what doesn't fit." No one spoke immediately, which was expected, because inconsistency required comparison, and comparison required a baseline that most of them were only just beginning to reconstruct. "The room," the woman by the window said slowly. "My room." Hale nodded slightly. "What about it?" "It felt different when I woke up." "How?" "I don't know," she said again, frustration creeping in, like something had been moved. "Was anything missing?" "No." "Odded?" She hesitated. "I don't think so." "Think less," Hale said. "Notice more." She closed her eyes again, briefly this time, not following instruction, but seeking clarity. "The chair," she said after a moment. "It wasn't where I left it." "Where was it?" "Closer to the bed." "Did you move it?" "No." "Are you sure?" She opened her eyes, meeting his gaze. "No, I'm not." Hale nodded once, as if that answer was more valuable than certainty. "Good," he said again. The man with crossed arms exhaled sharply. "You keep saying that like confusion is progress." "It is," Hale replied. "Clarity built on false assumptions is worse than confusion." He stepped back toward the center of the room, reestablishing his position within the group. "Someone moved through your environment last night. Not invisibly, not undetectably, just unregistered." "That's not possible," the man said. "It already happened. That's why we're here." He let that settle, then continued. "The question isn't how they avoided being seen, it's how they avoided being remembered." A longer silence followed this time, heavier, more deliberate, as the implication began to take shape in their minds. "You're saying," the woman said slowly, "that even if we saw something, you might not have encoded it," Hale finished, "not in a way your brain recognizes as memory." "That's uncomfortable," Hale said. "Yes." He looked around the room one more time, taking in the collective state, the shift from dismissal to reluctant engagement, the beginning of a shared problem rather than individual confusion, and with it, the first real alignment of the group with the investigation. "Now," he said, his tone returning to something almost neutral, almost procedural, "we move from perception to sequence." He paused just long enough to ensure attention.
I need you to reconstruct your evening, he continued, not as a story, but as fragments, sensations, movements, interruptions. And if we can't? Someone asked. Hale's gaze settled on them, steady, unhurried. You can, he said. A beat. You just don't know which parts matter yet. The reconstruction began badly, which was exactly how it was supposed to begin, because coherent stories were usually lies people told themselves to avoid confronting gaps they could not explain. Edward Hale did not ask for timelines anymore. He asked for fragments, and fragments resisted narrative. They stayed jagged, incomplete, inconvenient, and that was where truth tended to hide. The room had settled into a different kind of silence now, not the engineered quiet of the hotel, but the human version, hesitant, searching, occasionally interrupted by a voice that sounded less certain each time it spoke. Hale moved slowly along the perimeter, not circling like a predator, but distributing his presence so no one felt entirely outside the field of observation. And in that distributed pressure, details began to surface. Someone mentioned a glass that had not been empty when they set it down, but was empty when they returned to it. Someone else described a moment of disorientation in the corridor that lasted a second or maybe longer, which meant it had been longer, because people underestimated what they could not measure. Hale did not validate or reject any of it. He simply placed each piece into a structure that existed only in his head, aligning them not by sequence, but by compatibility, and slowly a pattern began to suggest itself. Not a clear image yet, but the outline of one, like a shape emerging behind frosted glass. He stopped near a low table where a decorative bowl of polished stones sat untouched, each stone identical in color but slightly different in shape, and he let his fingers hover just above them without making contact, because even objects arranged to appear random followed rules, and those rules were often more honest than people. Let's change the angle, he said, not raising his voice but shifting its cadence just enough to pull attention back toward him. Stop thinking about what you did, start thinking about what changed. A man near the entrance frowned. That's the same thing. No, Hale said. What you did is filtered through intention. What changed is not. He glanced at the group, then pointed, not aggressively, just precisely, toward the younger woman who mentioned the smell earlier. You said something about the air. She straightened slightly, caught between reluctance and the need to be consistent. It felt heavier at some point. When? Hale asked. I don't know. Before or after you went to your room? A pause. After, she said, then hesitated. I think. Hale nodded once. Good, he said. Keep going. There was a moment, she continued slowly, when I thought I should open a window. There are no windows that open, someone else said. I know, she snapped, then immediately softened, aware of the tension in her own voice. Hale watched her carefully, not the words, but the timing between them, the way her certainty flickered in and out as she tried to stabilize something that resisted structure.
And did you open it? He asked.
No.
Why not?
She hesitated again, longer this time. I forgot, she said. Hale let that sit for a second, then shifted his attention to the man who had been most resistant from the start, the one who kept folding his arms as if holding himself together. You, Hale said, what's the first thing that doesn't fit? The man exhaled sharply. I told you nothing. Try again, Hale said, not louder but firmer, narrowing the available exits from the conversation. The man looked away, then back, then finally down at his own hands as if they might provide a more reliable answer than his memory. My shoes, he said. Hale didn't react immediately. What about them? They were cleaner, the man said, the words coming slower now, less filtered. When I woke up. Cleaner than what? Than they should have been. Why should they have been dirty? I walked outside, he said, before dinner. It was raining. Hale nodded slightly. And when you woke up? No dirt, no watermarks, nothing. Did you clean them? No. Did anyone else? I don't know. Good, Hale said again. The man looked up, irritation returning. Stop saying that like it explains anything. It doesn't. It just means we're getting closer to something that does. He stepped away from the table, moving back toward the center, recalibrating the room again because the dynamic had shifted. Less resistance now, more engagement, more willingness to test the edges of their own uncertainty. Let's isolate a window, he said, not a physical one, a temporal one. No one interrupted. Between dinner and waking up, there is a gap, but it's not empty, it's just unaccounted for. He paused, letting the phrasing settle. I want to know where that gap begins, not when you stopped remembering, but when something first felt off. Silence, but different again, more focused, more directed inward. I felt dizzy, someone said quietly. When? After dessert, the woman said, just for a second. I thought I stood up too quickly. And then? It went away. Or you stopped noticing it, Hale corrected. She frowned but didn't argue. Another voice, this time from a man who had not spoken yet. I remember the hallway, he said, not clearly, just the lights. What about them? Hale asked. They were softer or dimmer, I can't tell. Were they actually dimmer, Hale said, or did they seem dimmer? The man hesitated. I don't know. Good, Hale said again, almost absently now, because the word had stopped being a reassurance and had become a marker, a way of flagging data points that fit the emerging structure. He turned slightly, looking up again toward the vents, toward the invisible system that shaped everything without being seen. What if, he said almost to himself, the environment doesn't just calm you but synchronize you? What does that mean? The younger woman asked. It means, Hale said, bringing his gaze back down, that your responses start to align, your attention narrows, your reactions become predictable. That's how relaxation works, someone said. Yes, at low levels. A pause. And at higher levels? The man with the clean shoes asked, despite himself. Hale met his gaze. At higher levels, he said, you stop forming reliable memories. Silence.
That's not, someone began. Impossible? Hale finished. No, just uncomfortable. He stepped toward the edge of the group and stopped again, as if catching a thought mid-motion. Let's test something, he said. No one objected. Everyone, he continued, take a step back. There was a brief hesitation, then compliance, chairs shifting slightly, bodies adjusting, the group expanding just enough to create space between individuals. Now, Hale said, look at the floor. They did. What do you see? Carpet, someone said. Pattern, another added. Nothing unusual. Hale nodded. Now, look at each other's feet. A few people exchanged glances but followed the instruction. And now, Hale said, tell me if anything doesn't match. There was a pause, then another, longer this time, as attention shifted from generalized observation to comparison, from assumption to detail. The shoes, the younger woman said first, pointing slightly. His shoes. All eyes moved. The man with the clean shoes stiffened. What about them? He asked, defensive again. They don't match the carpet, she said. They're not supposed to, he replied. That's not what I mean, she said, frowning. They're too clean. A ripple moved through the group. He already said that, someone else added. Yes, Hale said quietly, he did. He stepped closer, not invading, just reducing distance. Rain outside, Hale said. No dirt on the shoes, no watermarks. He let that settle, then added, and yet we have compression patterns in the victim's room that suggest movement. The room stilled. You're saying someone began. I'm saying nothing yet. I'm connecting variables. He looked at the man again, not accusing, not even focusing on him directly, but placing him within the structure that was forming. If someone moved through this space, Hale said, under conditions where perception was altered. A pause.
then physical traces become more reliable than memory. No one spoke. Hale turned slightly, his gaze moving across the group once more, then back toward the corridor that led to the rooms. "The question isn't who you think you were last night," he said. Another pause. "It's where your body actually was." Silence followed, heavy, unavoidable now, as the investigation shifted from abstraction to something much closer to implication, and for the first time since he had entered the hotel, Hale felt the case tighten, not into a conclusion, not yet, but into a direction that would not easily be undone. Somewhere between the air, the missing time, the altered perception, and the physical traces that refused to align with memory, the structure had begun to reveal itself, and it was no longer a question of whether something had been hidden, but of how carefully it had been allowed to remain unnoticed. He exhaled slowly, the faint scent in the air catching again at the edge of awareness, and this time he did not ignore it, because it was no longer background, it was part of the system, part of the method, and methods, unlike stories, always left a pattern behind. He looked back at the group one last time. "Now," he said quietly, "we find out who moved and who didn't remember moving."
The corridor felt narrower on the way back, not because its dimensions had changed, but because attention had, and Edward Hale moved through it without slowing, without acknowledging the subtle resistance that spaces like this imposed when you started to see them for what they were. Behind him, the man from management kept pace, half a step back, as if uncertain whether to lead or follow, which was the correct position for someone who had lost control of the narrative but had not yet admitted it. The door to the victim's room waited at the end of the corridor like a fixed point in an equation that had started to produce results, and Hale paused before opening it, not out of hesitation, but because thresholds mattered more now than they had earlier. What you noticed when you entered a space the second time was never the same as the first, because the mind no longer accepted neutrality as an option. He opened the door without comment, stepped inside, and immediately the room rearranged itself in his perception, not physically but structurally, each element no longer isolated but connected, each detail no longer passive but active, part of a system that had been designed to produce a specific outcome. "Close the door," he said. The man did, and the click of the latch sounded louder than it should have, which meant Hale was paying attention to it, which meant it mattered. He moved towards the body again, not crouching this time, not immediately, but circling it slowly, mapping distances with his steps, aligning them with what he had already seen in the lounge, with the positions of the guests, with the fragments of memory that had begun to surface under pressure. The ash was still there, undisturbed, its presence now less an anomaly and more a marker, a fixed reference point in a shifting field. "You said no one smokes here?" Hale said. "No, it's strictly prohibited." "And yet," Hale said, gesturing lightly toward the floor, "we have ash." The man stepped closer, frowning. "That could have been transferred from outside." "On what?" Hale asked. "Shoes? Clothing?" "Then we would see distribution," Hale cut in. "We don't. It's localized." He crouched now, lowering himself with controlled precision, bringing his line of sight parallel to the carpet, and from this angle the compression patterns became clearer, not obvious, not dramatic, but consistent, a sequence of subtle depressions that did not align with the expected path from door to bed. "Look," Hale said. The man hesitated, then crouched beside him, following the direction of Hale's gaze. "I don't see—" "Stop looking for shapes," Hale said quietly. "Look for pressure." A pause. "Here," Hale added, tracing the air just above the carpet without touching it. "And here. And here." The man leaned in, adjusting his focus, and then something shifted in his expression, not understanding yet, but recognition of difference. "That's not straight," he said. "No, it isn't." He stood again, stepping back to re-establish the full view. If someone walked directly from the door to the body, we would see a linear pattern. We don't. Then what do we see? A hesitation, a deviation. He moved to the side, positioning himself where the pattern suggested a pause had occurred, then turned slightly, aligning his body with the angle of the compression marks. "Whoever moved here," he said, stopped. "Why?"
Hale didn't answer immediately. Instead, he shifted his attention to the bed again, to its untouched surface, to the absence of disturbance that seemed wrong before and now felt deliberate. "Because they were checking something," he said finally. "What?" Hale glanced toward the man, then back at the room. Not what, who? Silence settled between them, heavier than before. "You think the victim was already impaired?" Hale finished. "Yes." "How can you be sure?" Hale gestured subtly toward the air. "Because everyone else was," he said. A pause. "And because there are no signs of struggle." The MD exhaled slowly. "So the killer walks in, finds the victim already incapacitated, and then what? Kills him and leaves?" "That's the outline, not the method." He moved towards the window again, then stopped halfway, turning instead toward the wall where the vent was embedded, almost invisible unless you were looking for it. "Tell me about the system," he said. "What system?" "The air, distribution, control, adjustments." The man hesitated. "It's automated, centralized, calibrated for comfort." "And can it be adjusted locally?" "Not by guests."
That's not what I asked.
The man's jaw tightened slightly. "Yes," he said, "by staff." Hale nodded once, as if that answer had been expected. "And tonight?" "What about tonight?" "Were there any adjustments?" Hale asked. "I don't know." "Find out." The man straightened. "I'll have to find out," Hale repeated, not louder, but with enough precision to remove the possibility of delay. A brief pause. "I'll check," the man said, then moved toward the door. "Wait," Hale added. The man stopped. "Before you go," Hale said, "answer one more thing." The man turned. "Do the rooms receive identical air composition?" "Yes." "Exactly identical?" "As far as I know." Hale held his gaze for a second longer than necessary, then nodded. "Good," he said. "That means any variation is intentional." The man didn't respond, but something in his posture suggested the implication had landed. He left, the door closing behind him with that same precise click, and Hale was alone with the room again, which was how he preferred it when the structure started to tighten. He moved back toward the body, this time allowing himself to crouch fully, one knee close to the carpet, reducing the distance between observation and detail to its minimum. And now, with the broader pattern in place, smaller inconsistencies began to surface, not new, but reinterpreted, recontextualized. The fingertips of the victim's right hand showed a faint discoloration, not bruising, not dirt, but something else, something that suggested contact with a substance that had not left a visible residue elsewhere, and Hale leaned slightly closer, not touching, just observing the distribution, the edges, the way it interacted with the skin rather than the environment. "No struggle," he said quietly to himself. "No resistance." He shifted his gaze to the extended arm, to the angle of the fingers, slightly curled as if reaching, not in panic but in a delayed reaction, and that was wrong in a different way. People reaching for help moved differently than people reacting to something they didn't fully register. "You didn't see it coming," Hale murmured. He stood again, stepping back, reconstructing the sequence in his mind, not as a story, but as a series of states: entry, pause, approach, action, exit. The ash marked the proximity, the compression marked the movement, the absence of disturbance marked the control, and the air marked the condition under which all of it had occurred. He walked to the door, then stopped just before it, turning back once more to take in the entire room as a single system. "You didn't hide," he said softly, as if addressing the absent presence that had shaped the scene. "You were just ignored." The realization did not arrive as a shock, but as a confirmation, the kind that settled rather than struck, because the pieces had already aligned. They had just needed the right perspective to lock into place. The method was not invisibility, not speed, not even precision in the traditional sense. It was environment, controlled, calibrated, exploited. The killer had not needed to avoid attention, only to operate within a range where attention failed to convert into memory, and that changed everything, because it meant the crime had not been committed in isolation, but within a system that made it possible. The door opened behind him before he reached it, and the man returned, his expression tighter now, less composed. "There was an adjustment," he said. Hale didn't turn immediately.
When?
"Between 9 and 10, the man replied.
localized to this floor. Hale closed his eyes for a brief moment, not in frustration, but in alignment, placing the final piece into the structure that had already formed. "And the composition?" he asked. "A higher concentration," the man said, "within safe limits." "Defined by whom?" Hale asked. "By—" The man stopped, realizing the answer no longer mattered. Hale turned then, meeting his gaze. "Safe for comfort," he said, "not for cognition." The man didn't respond. "Good," Hale added quietly. "Now we know when the gap begins." He stepped past him into the corridor, the direction now fixed, the investigation no longer exploratory but targeted. "Next," he said, already moving, "we find who could operate inside that window and remain unaffected." The shift from uncertainty to direction was never loud, never dramatic. It happened in small, almost imperceptible adjustments, and by the time most people noticed it, the outcome had already begun to take shape. Edward Hale moved through the corridor without slowing now, not because he was rushing, but because hesitation no longer served a purpose. The structure had crossed a threshold where additional ambiguity would only dilute what was already clear, and behind him the man from management kept pace in silence, no longer attempting to guide, no longer offering explanations, because explanations had lost their value the moment they stopped aligning with observable facts. The lounge came into view again. The guests still gathered, but the dynamic had shifted further. Conversation reduced, posture tighter, the earlier attempts at normality replaced by something more contained, more cautious, as if each person had begun to suspect that they were part of something they did not fully understand but could no longer ignore. Hale paused at the entrance, not to observe this time, but to confirm, to align the internal model with the external reality. And then he stepped forward, closing the remaining distance without ceremony, because the next phase required precision, not performance. "Something changed between 9 and 10, he said, his voice even, controlled, but carrying a clarity that cut through the residual noise in the room. The air, composition adjusted, concentration increased. A few people exchanged glances, the earlier mention of scent now resurfacing with sharper edges. "That's still within safe limits," the man with crossed arms said, though the certainty in his voice had thinned. "For comfort," Hale replied, "not for memory." Silence. "What does that mean?" the younger woman asked. "It means," Hale said, "that your ability to form reliable sequences of events was compromised." "That's a very polite way of saying we were drugged," someone muttered. Hale didn't react to the phrasing. "It means your perception was altered," he corrected, "and more importantly, synchronized." "What do you mean by that?" the same man pressed. Hale stepped closer, not invading but narrowing the space just enough to force focus. "It means you didn't just become less aware, you became predictably less aware, at the same time, in the same way." A pause. "That's not random," he added. "That's usable." The word landed harder than the rest. "Usable for what?" the woman by the window asked. Hale let the question hang for a fraction of a second longer than necessary. "For movement," he said. "For timing. For absence." He turned slightly, shifting his attention across the group, aligning them not as individuals but as a system that had been acted upon. Between 9 and 10, there was a window where attention dropped below a threshold required for reliable encoding. "That's just a lot of words for saying we were tired," the man said. "No," Hale replied. "Tired people remember being tired. You don't remember anything." Silence again, heavier now, less resistant. "Now," Hale said, "we reduce the problem." He took a slow breath, not for effect, but to mark the transition. "During that window," he continued, "someone moved through this floor." No one spoke. They entered a room. They approached the victim. They acted, and they left. "And no one saw them?" someone whispered. "No one remembers seeing them," Hale corrected. A pause. "That's not the same thing." He shifted his gaze toward the man with the clean shoes.
You walked outside before dinner, Hale said. Yes. In the rain? Yes. And yet your shoes were clean this morning. The man stiffened. I told you I don't know how. You don't need to. I do. Silence. Hale took a slow breath, not for effect, but to mark the transition. During that window, he continued, someone moved through this floor. No one spoke. They entered a room. They approached the victim. They acted, and they left. And no one saw them, someone whispered. No one remembers seeing them, Hale corrected. A pause. That's not the same thing. He shifted his gaze toward the man with the clean shoes. You walked outside before dinner, Hale said. Yes. In the rain? Yes. And yet your shoes were clean this morning. The man stiffened. I told you I don't know how. You don't need to. I do.
You moved after dinner, he said. No, the man replied immediately. I went to my room. You don't remember going to your room, Hale said calmly. You assume it. That's ridiculous. Is it? Hale asked. Then explain your shoes. Someone could have... No one cleaned them, Hale cut in. Not without cleaning everything else. And everything else is not clean enough. The man's jaw tightened. You're making a guess. I'm eliminating variables, Hale replied. A pause. You walked, Hale continued, during the window, when your perception was altered, when your memory failed to record sequence. That doesn't mean I killed anyone. No, Hale agreed, it doesn't. The tension shifted slightly, confusion layered over defensiveness. Then what are you saying? The man asked. Hale stepped back, rebalancing the space, removing direct pressure just enough to allow the next part to land without resistance. I'm saying, he replied, that you were active. A pause. And you don't remember it. The room held still. That's impossible, someone said. It already happened, Hale answered. He turned slightly, addressing the group again. Memory is not a recording, it's a reconstruction, and under certain conditions, reconstruction fails. He let that settle, then added, but the body doesn't. Silence. The body moves, Hale continued. It leaves traces, pressure, displacement, contact. He gestured subtly, as if the room itself contained those traces, even though they were elsewhere. And those traces, he said, don't align with your memory. The younger woman swallowed. So someone used that, she said. Yes, Hale replied, to move without being noticed. To move without being remembered, Hale corrected. A longer pause. Then how do you know it was him? The man with crossed arms asked, nodding toward the one with the clean shoes. Hale looked at him, not dismissing the question, but acknowledging its necessity. I don't, he said. The answer landed harder than accusation. What? The man asked. I don't know it was him, Hale repeated. Not yet. Confusion rippled through the group. Then why? Because he's the only one who noticed something that contradicts his own assumption, and that makes him useful. The man stared at him. Useful? Yes, Hale said. Not guilty, not innocent, useful. A pause. You moved, Hale continued, his tone unchanged. That's a fact supported by physical evidence. What you did while moving is still open. The man's expression shifted, the defensiveness fracturing into something less stable, less certain. I don't remember anything, he said, quieter now. I know, Hale replied. Another pause. And that's exactly why this works. Silence settled again, but now it carried a different weight. Not resistance, not confusion, but the beginning of realization that the problem was larger than any single person, larger than intent, larger than memory. Now we refine, Hale said.
He turned slightly, scanning the group once more. Who here did not experience the gap? No one answered immediately. That's not possible, someone said. Everything so far was not supposed to be possible, Hale replied. A pause. Think carefully, not about what you remember, about what you don't. The room held still. Then, I didn't, a voice said. It came from the edge of the group, quiet, controlled, almost too controlled.
Hale turned. A woman stood there, posture straight, expression composed, eyes steady in a way that did not match the rest of the room. You didn't what? Hale asked. I didn't lose time, she said. Silence. You remember everything? Hale asked. Yes. No gaps? No. Hale watched her, not the words, but the alignment of them, the absence of hesitation, the precision that suggested not clarity, but preparation. What room are you in? He asked. 312, she replied. And during the window between 9 and 10, Hale continued, I was reading, she said, in my room. Alone? Yes. No interruptions? No. Hale nodded slowly. Interesting, he said. A pause. Because that's the only thing in this entire case that is perfectly consistent. The woman didn't move. And consistency, Hale added, in a system built on controlled variation is rarely accidental. The room held its breath. Hale took a step toward her, not aggressive, not confrontational, just enough to shift the center of gravity. You weren't affected, he said. No, she replied. Which means one of two things, Hale continued. Either you're an exception, a pause, or you're not a participant, silence. And in this system, he said quietly, there are no exceptions. The structure locked into place. Not completely, not conclusively, but enough. Hale exhaled slowly. Now, he said, his voice returning to something almost neutral, almost procedural again. We stop asking who moved, a beat, and start asking who didn't need to forget. The hotel did not change after the truth settled into place, which was precisely why it worked so well, because systems that depended on perception did not need to transform once exposed. They only needed to continue functioning for those who chose not to look too closely. Edward Hale stood once more in the lobby of the Vale, in the same position where the case had technically begun, though in reality it had started long before that, embedded in the architecture, in the air, in the promise of silence that had never been neutral. And across from him, behind the same reception desk, the same woman stood with the same controlled smile, unchanged, as if the intervening hours had been nothing more than a variation in lighting. You've resolved the situation, she said. Hale did not answer immediately. Instead, he let his gaze move across the space, not searching, not analyzing anymore, but confirming. Nothing out of place, nothing overt, nothing that would alert a guest who had come here to disconnect from anything other than themselves. Define resolved, he said. There are no further disturbances, she replied. Disturbance, Hale repeated quietly, as if testing the word for structural integrity. That's one way to describe it. A brief pause. And the guest, she asked. Dead, Hale said. Still. Her expression did not shift. And the cause? Hale looked at her then, properly this time, not as part of the environment, but as a variable that had remained deliberately constant throughout. Contained, he said. Another pause. That's acceptable, she replied. Hale allowed himself the smallest fraction of a smile. Not amusement, not approval, just acknowledgement. For you, he said. Silence settled between them, not uncomfortable but definitive, the kind that marked the boundary between two interpretations of the same reality. You understand that this place is designed to help people. Hale glanced briefly toward the corridor, toward the rooms, toward the system that had already proven its capacity for something far more precise than help. It's designed to remove friction, he said. That's the same thing. No, Hale replied. Friction is what tells you something is wrong. A pause. And without it? You stop noticing, he said. The woman inclined her head slightly,
as if considering that not as criticism, but as a feature. That's why they come here, she said, to stop noticing. Hale did not argue. That's why it works, he said. Another brief silence, then she reached beneath the desk and produced the same matte tray from earlier, placing it in front of him with identical precision, the envelope now slightly heavier, not physically, but contextually. Your phone, she said. Hale looked at it, then at her. And everything else? He asked. Returned to its original state, she replied. Is that what you call it? That's what it is. He picked up the envelope, not opening it yet, just holding it for a moment, as if weighing the difference between what had been recorded and what had not. They won't remember, she added. Hale slipped the phone back into his pocket. No, he said. They won't. A pause. And the one who did? She asked. Hale's gaze shifted, just slightly, toward the elevator, toward the direction where the woman from room 312 had last been seen, her composure intact until the structure of the case had collapsed around her, revealing not panic but calculation. She had not forgotten because she had never been part of the system in the same way as the others, not a guest in the functional sense, but an operator, someone who understood the thresholds, the timing, the narrow margin where perception failed and action could pass through without resistance. The method had not required invisibility, only alignment, an environment tuned to reduce awareness, a victim already within that range, and a person who could move through it unaffected, or at least unaffected enough to maintain continuity where others could not. She remembered exactly what she needed to, Hale said. And now? The woman at the desk asked. Hale met her gaze again. Now she's part of your system, he said. A pause. Like everyone else. The receptionist did not confirm or deny it, which was confirmation enough. You could report it, she said. I could, Hale agreed. And? He considered the question, not as a moral dilemma, but as a structural one, because outcomes were rarely about what was right, but what would actually change. And nothing, he said. Another silence, this one lighter, almost procedural. People will continue to come, she said. Yes. They will disconnect. Yes. They will feel better. Hale allowed himself a small exhale, not quite a sigh. Until they don't, he said. The woman's expression remained steady. That's not our responsibility. No, Hale replied. It isn't. He turned then, not abruptly, not dramatically, just enough to signal that the interaction had reached its natural conclusion, and began walking toward the exit, each step carrying him back through the same space that had not changed and yet had revealed everything it was designed to conceal. The doors opened before he reached them, just as they had before, and the city waited on the other side, louder, less controlled, less precise, but also less deceptive in its intentions. He stepped out into the air that had not been curated, that carried inconsistencies and noise and friction, and for a moment he simply stood there, letting it register, letting the contrast re-establish itself in his senses, because without contrast, nothing held meaning for long. Behind him, the doors closed, sealing the veil back into its own logic, its own equilibrium, ready for the next set of guests who would trade awareness for comfort without realizing that the exchange was not equal. Hale did not look back immediately because looking back implied attachment, and this had never been about attachment. It had been about understanding, about identifying the mechanism beneath the surface and confirming that it functioned exactly as expected. When he finally did turn, it was only to glance at the building as a whole, not as a place, but as a system, a controlled environment that did not need to hide what it was doing because most people would never think to question it. 5 million cameras could miss a murder if attention was directed elsewhere. 100 people could share a space and still fail to register the same event if their perception was aligned just slightly out of phase. The absence of technology did not create truth, it only removed one layer of distortion and replaced it with another, subtler one, harder to detect because it felt like relief. Hale adjusted his coat, the motion automatic, unremarkable, and began walking, merging back into the city's rhythm without effort because unlike the Veil, the city did not pretend to be anything other than what it was, a collection of systems, some visible, most not, all operating whether you noticed them or not. He took out his phone after a few steps, not to check messages, not to reconnect immediately, but to confirm its presence, its weight, its role as both tool and anchor. And for a moment, he considered the irony, not that people depended on devices, but that they trusted their absence more than their presence, as if removing the record made events less real rather than less verifiable. He slipped it back into his pocket without unlocking it, the gesture deliberate, controlled, a reminder rather than a necessity. Somewhere inside the Veil, the air would continue to circulate, calibrated, measured, adjusted within limits defined as safe, limits that did not account for what happened at the edges of perception where awareness thinned just enough to create opportunity. The guests would leave with a sense of calm they could not fully explain, with gaps they would not question, with an experience that would feel complete precisely because it was not, and the system would reset, ready to produce the same outcome again, not by chance, but by design. Hale did not need to follow it further because the case in its purest form had already resolved, not in terms of justice, not in terms of consequence, but in terms of understanding. And for him, that was the only resolution that mattered. He moved through the crowd, unnoticed, unremarkable, another variable in a larger system, and as he disappeared into the flow of the city, the thought that had anchored the entire investigation settled into its final, simplest form, not as a revelation, but as a principle. The most effective way to hide something was never to remove it. It was to make sure no one knew they had seen it.
In a world without signal, truth doesn't disappear, it just becomes harder to remember. If you enjoy modern detective stories in the spirit of Sherlock Holmes, subscribe. The next case is already waiting.